Tonight, we wander down the ancient Via Sacra as dust's purple breath settles over Rome's colossal sentinel, and you probably won't survive this without a yawn or two. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the cracked flagstones of the Via Sacra, Rome's main ceremonial road, stretching nearly 2 kilometers between the Capitoline and the Colosseum. Its surface, worn smooth from centuries of sandals and blood-soaked chariots. Mainstream fact: this street once bore the triumphant processions of emperors riding victoriously beneath laurel wreaths, their togas fluttering like timid moths against the fading light. Yet here in the hush of twilight, you're alone except for the scrabbling feet of late forging rats and an occasional owl perched high on a cracked travertine column, blinking in the gloom like an imperial sentinel gone rogue. Your footsteps echo against the silent temples that line the route, Vesta's circular shrine to your right, where Vestal virgins once tended eternal flames, and the temple of Saturn to your left, its pillars tall and skeletal. Quirky tidbit: some locals whisper that stray cats of ancient Rome were miniature deities in fur coats, imported cleverly to gobble up grain-thieving rodents. Historians still argue whether these felines were pampered pets or wartime substitutes for rat catchers. Either way, you can almost hear tiny paws skittering beneath the marble shadows. A gentle sarcasm drifts into your thoughts as you glance at each inscription carved into the stone. Names of emperors, senators, and obscure magistrates who probably had worse colds than you do right now. You imagine Julius Caesar himself once pacing these stones, muttering, "Et tu, brute." If only the breeze carried any gossip so biting. Instead, all that reaches you is the soft creak of a wooden sign, swinging in an unseen courtyard, announcing a free toga hire that went out of business 2 millennia ago. Joke 1. Maybe they ran out of extra-large togas. Ahead, the arches of the Colosseum loom into view, its outer wall fractured in places, like a grinning skull missing a few teeth. Mainstream fact: construction began under Emperor Vespasian in 72 AD and finished under Titus 8 years later, creating the largest amphitheater the world had ever seen. But right now, it stands quiet, its corridors empty, waiting for dawn's footfalls. A breeze stirs the arena's arches, carrying the faint scent of crushed sandalwood incense, likely spilled by a pious worshipper or left behind by a weary gladiator hoping for divine favor. You pause at the base of the Flavian structure, tracing your fingers over the damp stone, which still retains the chill of night and the warmth of centuries-old festivals. Quirky tidbit number 2. Rumor has it that during the empire's height, a particularly bored emperor once drained the Colosseum's hydraulic system to flood the arena for mock naval battles, complete with miniature ships and startled carp. Historians still argue whether those staged naumachii were realistic reenactments or just soggy PR stunts. Either way, you can almost smell the brine. As your eyes adjust to the gloom beneath the arches, you notice graffiti etched by ancient spectators. Names like Lucius was here, and crude sketches of favored gladiators. Beneath one playful carving of a mouse wearing a crown, you can almost hear a distant laugh, as if some wag centuries ago scaled the wall to leave a cheeky signature. Joke 2. Definitely the original street artist. No aerosol paint needed, just iron nails and a sense of humor. With each step deeper into the shadowed arcade, the cool night air wraps around you like an old cloak, threadbare yet comforting. You probably won't survive this evening's tour without blinking a few times, but rest easy. you're in safe hands. Well, mostly. After all, this place once hosted the fiercest lions, not bedtime kittens. The floor beneath you is uneven, warning you to watch your step or risk an impromptu tumble into history. You wonder if anyone bothered to leave small warning signs, but then remember that caution, uneven ancient stone, wasn't a Roman invention. Joke 3. OSHA would have a field day here. A ripple of distant traffic reminds you that modern Rome never truly sleeps. Somewhere beyond the broken arches, scooters hum and late-night trattorias buzz with the laughter of tourists who, unlike you, prefer pizza to panoramic ruins at bedtime. But here, in this filtered moment, you are the only witness to the Colosseum's slumber. That grand old gladiator whose only battle tonight is against the hush of darkness. Historians still argue whether the original seating held 50,000 or closer to 80,000 souls. But right now, the amphitheatre seats precisely 0 living spectators. And for your purposes, that's just perfect. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the mingled scents of stone, moss, and ancient sweat that cling like a comforting memory. Imagine drifting off to sleep right here, leaning against an arch pillar, lulled by the gentle murmurs of Rome's nocturnal chorus. In a few hours, the first torchlit crews will rouse the gates. Sailors will haul up the velarium, and Caesar himself, figuratively speaking, will stroll these halls once more. But for now, all is calm. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the moment before moving to the following silent threshold. You slip away from the cavernous arches of the Colosseum and head toward a narrower portal carved into the outer wall, Porta Libitinensis, named for Libitina, Rome's goddess of funerals, whose temple once stood nearby. The gate looms like the entrance to a subterranean catacomb, its lintel still bearing faint reliefs of inverted torches and funerary urns. Mainstream fact: this was the primary exit for wounded or dying gladiators after the games, and later served as the departure point for funeral processions winding through the Forum toward the Campus Martius. As you approach, the cool night air feels heavier here, as if weighed down by centuries of sorrow and solemn chants. You brush a finger across chipped red ochre paint that once highlighted the gate's carved symbols, perhaps a last-ditch attempt at Roman advertising, shouting spectacular gratis to thrill-seekers. Quirky tidbit. Local raconteurs still swear that on moonless nights, fallen gladiators who never found a proper burial wander the Via Sacra, seeking Libitina's mercy from beyond. Historians still argue whether such ghost stories emerged in medieval texts, or were ancient campfire tales meant to scare runaway slaves back into formation. Stepping beneath the stone arch is like entering a different world, a dimly lit corridor where the echo of your sandals becomes a whispered chant. The walls here feel close, almost breathing, as if they've absorbed every lament, every dirge, every whispered prayer since the first tunic-clad pallbearer trudged through. The ground is strewn with rubble and small fragments of bone-white marble that glint under your lantern's flame. You stoop to examine one shard, roughly the size of your palm, and imagine it was part of a commemorative plaque, perhaps inscribed with a gladiator's name and his victor's wreath count. Joke 1. Imagine carving Gaius the Great every time he won. Talk about an early version of social media boasting. A distant drip of water echoes through the corridor, each plip-plop sounding like a slow heartbeat, counting down the hours you've been awake. The scent of damp earth mingles with faint traces of frankincense, leftover offerings homeowners once believed would secure safe passage for their loved ones into the underworld. It's odd and slightly comforting to find incense here rather than the expected whiff of putrefaction. Quirky tidbit 2. Some believe Libertina's shrine possessed a secret crypt sealed behind these walls, filled with cypress coffins and lead scrolls listing every citizen's death date. Historians still argue whether those death rolls ever existed or were later inventions by bureaucrats seeking to monetize burial fees. The narrow passage widens suddenly into a circular antechamber lit by a single iron brazier burning pale coals. The flames cast dancing shadows that twist across the stone like otherworldly dancers. You step closer, feeling the heat on your face, though the surrounding air remains cool enough to wrinkle your breath into tiny clouds. Hidden niches carved into the wall once held oil lamps. Now all are empty, except for a solitary wick long since spent. You imagine lanterns swinging overhead as pallbearers file through, cloaked in white, their faces concealed beneath hoods to honor the dead in respectful anonymity. Your hand brushes against an inscription sketched roughly into the rock, Vale Marcus Tullius, in looping cursive. You wonder if that was scribbled by a friend grieving too soon, or by an insolent graffiti artist marking territory in the afterlife. Joke 2. Maybe Marcus was the first influencer to die and decided to leave a final post. Scholars still debate whether this inscription dates to the 2nd century AD or was added during medieval pilgrimages, when Europe rediscovered Rome's crumbling grandeur and pilgrims scrawled prayers on anything resembling parchment. A faint metallic clink draws your attention upward. A small iron ring hangs from the ceiling like a forgotten pull chain. You give it a gentle tug, and a fragment of the ancient trapdoor creaks in response. Some evenings, local guides daringly pull and claim a secret compartment rattles below, filled with dusty amphorae, or perhaps Libertina's own lost funeral paraphernalia. But as the floor remains silent, you suspect it's just a cleverly planted legend, meant to tantalize thrill seekers on private after-hours tours. Historians still argue whether any genuine substructures exist beyond the official Hypagium maps drawn by the Empire's surveyors. You shuffle forward, your lantern's glow flickering over carved footsteps worn into the stone by thousands of mourners. These concave grooves, roughly ankle deep, guide your eyes along the wall, where faded red paint hints at long-vanished funerary processions. It's meditative, each step connecting you to a single soul who walked here centuries ago. The quiet is so intense that even your heartbeat seems loud, insistently reminding you that you're very much alive in this realm of death's memory. Joke 3. Congratulations. You've reached the after-party entrance to eternal rest. No RSVP needed. Soon the corridor curves again, opening onto a small balcony overlooking the arena's arena floor. You peer through narrow slits in the stone wall and see the sand-strewn earth pit far below. Moonlight filters through the ruined arches overhead, splashing silver onto the tattered remains of drainage channels once used to clear blood and rainwater. The sight is hypnotic, narrow bands of moonlight crisscrossing the sand like veins glowing beneath skin. You lean over, feeling safe in the elevated calm, above the madness, removed from roaring crowds. The contrast is oddly soothing, as if you've climbed above your worries and can glimpse life's greater landscape. Stepping back from the balcony, you notice faint scuff marks on the wall, perhaps where mourners brushed against the stone, leaving behind traces of oil or sweat. You press your palm to the surface. It's smooth and cool, like an eternal handshake with the past. This gate has seen more death than any other portal in Rome. Yet tonight, It's granting you passage not to the afterlife, but to the deeper secrets of a city that never truly sleeps. The boundary between one world and another leverages a hushed reverence, an unspoken invitation to move onward. Exhaling slowly, you tuck the lantern under your arm and prepare to descend once more into the Hippodrome's depths. Behind you, Porta Libertinensis stands silent, its funerary legacy sealed in silent stone. Around you, shadows stretch longer, leaning into the corridors like silent companions. As you step away, you can almost hear Libertina herself, her voice a soft lament carried on a faint breeze, beckoning you onward, deeper into the Colosseum's heart. And so you trudge forward, lantern in hand, curiosity guiding every careful footfall as the ancient amphitheatre whispers its dark lullaby. You step through a low archway and find yourself at the Hippodrome entrance, the subterranean underbelly of the Colosseum, where the real spectacle began long before the sun peaked over Rome's rooftops. The air here is cooler, heavier, almost perfumed with moisture and age. Mainstream fact, the Hippodrome consisted of 2 levels of tunnels and cages, connected by a network of pulleys and trapdoors that allowed gladiators, beasts, and stage sets to rise into the arena with sudden theatrical flair. Tonight, though, it's silent, its iron grates shuttered for the night. Your lantern casts a trembling glow across damp stone walls furred with moss, and you catch glimpses of rusted iron rings where chains once dangled. Quirky tidbit. Legend says a wealthy sponsor once lost his pet peacock down here, only to discover it weeks later living among the captured lions, strutting regally, completely unruffled by its new feline roommates. Historians still argue whether that peacock was real, or a later embellishment intended to mock imperial extravagance. You crouch to peer through a grated opening 10 feet below your feet, revealing a narrow corridor that stretches into darkness. A single oaken crate sits in the center, its wood splintered and grey. You imagine it once held a snarling tigress imported from India, her paws pacing against the floorboards as she scented the damp stone for prey. You lean closer, the grate's metal cool against your cheek, and swear you hear a faint echo of a growl. Or perhaps it's just your mind playing tricks in the hush. Joke 1. If nothing else, it's one way to test your willpower not to sprint for the exit. Rising to your feet with a soft grunt, you run your fingers along carved grooves in the wall. These were the finger holds used by stagehands and animal handlers to scale in and out of service tunnels. The stone is slick from centuries of sweat and olive oil. Some grooves are deep enough to cradle your entire palm. You plant your feet on the worn masonry and press your back against the wall, imagining the adrenaline surge of an enslaved combatant waiting minutes before his cue. Mainstream fact, some tunnels were less than 5 feet tall, forcing even the tallest gladiators to crouch or crawl, their armor clinking like wind chimes in a draft. A sudden drip from overhead splashes into a shallow puddle at your feet, and you wonder if the Hippodrome's drainage system still trickles, as it was designed nearly 1900 years ago. Quirky tidbit 2. Several medieval scholars claim to have discovered secret manuscripts hidden in the Hippodrome's walls, scrolls teaching how to tame elephants for combat. Historians still argue whether these scrolls ever existed, or were clever forgeries designed to boost monastic libraries' prestige. You move forward along a narrow path, illuminated only by your lantern. The floor is uneven, littered with broken pottery shards and scraps of leather that once formed gladiators' protective gear. You step gingerly, mindful that a misplaced foot could send you tumbling into an unlit shaft. Your heart picks up its pace, not from fear so much as the thrill of trespassing, where the Empire's mightiest fighters and most exotic creatures lay in wait. As you round a bend, you catch sight of a faded fresco on the wall, a stylized lion, its mane rendered in ochre and black pigment, roaring toward an invisible horizon. The paint is flaking, but you can still trace the brushstrokes of an artisan whose name is lost to time. You imagine him mixing his pigments at dawn, humming a folk tune as he painted patrons' coats of arms alongside ferocious beasts. You lean in, nose inches from the stone, inhaling the faint scent of pigment and mortar. Joke 2. If you thought adult paint by numbers was relaxing, try fresco restoration in the middle of the night. Ahead lies a broad trapdoor, its iron hinges corroded but intact. You prod it with your boot, and it groans on its pivot, releasing a sputter of stale air from the chamber below. Mainstream fact: trapdoors varied in size, some only 2 feet square for solitary combatants, others 12 feet across to hoist entire cages of animals or mock naval vessels. Historians still argue whether the hydraulics used for the Namakii were sourced locally or adapted from Egyptian irrigation technology. With a deep breath, you lift one edge and peer into the yawning pit. A shaft descends at least 15 feet, its bottom lost in shadow. You can just make out wooden scaffolding and thick ropes coiled neatly to one side, perhaps left by an enterprising servant who favored neatness over anonymity. Your lantern's beam shifts to reveal scratch marks on the trapdoor's underside, names and dates crudely etched. Marcus 89 AD, Lucilla 102 AD, and one lonely, Aurelius 217 AD, written in a hand far more elegant. You press your finger against Aurelius's name, feeling the depression beneath your fingertip, as if you're recalling the pulse of someone long gone. Rather than descend, you slide the trapdoor back and replace it with a soft thunk that echoes like a muted heartbeat. Standing again, you brush dust off your hands and continue down the corridor. The walls pinch closer here, funneling your path toward a broader chamber, a staging area where animals were kept in enclosures partitioned by rough-hewn stone walls. The faint smell of old straw drifts through cracks, competing with the earthy musk of damp stone. You crouch by one enclosure's iron bars and peer in. A rusted chain dangles from a ring set into the wall, likely the tether for a rowdy bear or an angry bull. The floor is scattered with pellets of excrement long since dried to a chalky white, and among them lie a few strands of what might have been the animal's fur. You lean away, patting your jeans awkwardly to dislodge imagined ticks. Joke 3. Glamorous life hack. Bear chasing is the new run with the bulls, slightly more exclusive. Drawing yourself upright, you take a moment to sense the subterranean hush. Above you, the amphitheater's vaulted corridors would be filled with activity at midday. But down here, the world feels paused, caught between the clang of iron gates and the roar that never came. Historians still argue whether the central lifts could raise entire cages simultaneously, or if the Romans staged smaller, sequential reveals for dramatic effect. With your lantern held aloft, you trace the ceiling's low arch toward a distant flicker of light, perhaps a remnant torch left burning by a curious guard, or an improvised sodium nitrate lamp used during medieval restorations. You follow the glow, mindful of every loose stone and echoing drip, until at last the corridor turns upward. It sloped gentle, guiding you back toward the surface. As you ascend, the sound of your own breathing seems loud in the tunnel's hush, each inhalation reminding you of the world above. You emerge at a grated window overlooking the Colosseum's inner arena. Moonlight streams in, illuminating glittering particles in the air, tiny motes of dust dancing like suspended stars. You set down your lantern and lean on the sill, gazing out. In this moment, you're perched between two worlds. Below, the dreams of emperors and beasts sleeping in the dark. Above, the marble seats waiting for their crowds. The contrast is electric, a silent prelude to chaos. Straightening up, you retrieve your lantern and tuck it under your arm, ready to continue your nocturnal adventure. Behind you, the hypogeum's tunnels stretch back into the earth, silent, waiting for the next sunrise to breathe life into these unused passageways once more. You pause, savoring the hush, before moving on, deeper into the Colosseum's concealed heart. You slip away from the grated window overlooking the hypogeum and follow a narrow corridor that curves gently to the left, each step carrying you deeper into the Colosseum's silent soul. Lantern in hand, you approach an open archway leading into a wide barrel-vaulted passage, once clogged with the roar of tens of thousands, now settled into an echo chamber for ghostly whispers. Historians still argue whether the acoustics were intentionally designed or simply a happy accident of Roman engineering. Either way, tonight you're about to become the sole audience to these whispered stories of past games. As you enter, the walls on either side are etched with faint graffiti, dozens of names, dates, and crude drawings of gladiators mid-swing. Mainstream fact: spectators often carved their allegiance to favored fighters into the stone, much like signing a petition, and some of these carvings still survive nearly 2 millennia later. You run your fingertips over a crudely rendered figure wielding a trident, captioned Maximus the Mighty, and imagine the original signer, perhaps a sunburned plebeian shouting approval after a particularly dramatic match. A soft breeze stirs in the tunnel, carrying slivers of conversation, as if the stones themselves are gossiping among themselves. You pause and hush your own breath, straining to catch any snippets. A murmillo fell. The emperor laughed. Blood rose higher than sandals. The voices are hushed, as though retelling secrets that spilled only at game's end. Quirky tidbit: an 18th century antiquarian claimed to record a clear echo of a defeated gladiator's final cry, mea culpa. But skeptics insist this was simply the antiquarian sipping too much Chianti by torchlight. Up ahead, you round a bend into a circular alcove where a single stone bench sits against the far wall. You settle onto the bench, careful of the uneven surface, and allow the echoes to float around you. It feels like you're sitting in the last remaining box seat of history, listening to a phantom broadcast. Joke 1. The only concession stand you'll find here sells imaginary garum-flavored popcorn. You notice grooves scratched into the wall at bench level, like the teeth marks of impatient spectators waiting for their favorite champion to appear. You run your thumb across one groove and feel a tremor of connection to someone nearly 2,000 years gone. Tonight, that person is your unseen companion, sharing an evening of anticipation and spectacle. You imagine the scent of sweat, leather, and sand drifting past, so strong that even modern cologne couldn't mask it. Mainstream fact: the arena's sand was specially imported to absorb blood, hence the Latin name harina, which also meant blood-soaked ground. Historians still argue whether the sand came from Tunisian deserts or local Italian quarries, but either way, it did its job well. The tunnel ahead narrows, guiding you toward a wooden door patched into the stone arch. You push it open with a creak that echoes like a trumpet flourish, stepping into a low-ceilinged chamber, the announcer's vestibule. Here, heralds once prepared their scrolls, practicing glottal stops and vocal flourishes to hype eager crowds. Now the room stands empty, save for a stray parchment fragment on the floor. You pick it up and blow gently, sending tiny dust motes drifting upward. The fragment bears faded Latin letters, Ave Cae, most likely part of the standard greeting to the emperor, Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. Joke 2. Ironic if said in a recruitment office today. You trace each letter with your fingertip, imagining the herald pacing this very spot, rehearsing his delivery in front of a worn mirror, smoothing his tunic's plaited edge. Although the official greeting may have occurred only once, during a mock naumachia in AD 52, when condemned criminals staged a sea battle, historians still argue whether the phrase was ever uttered by gladiators, or simply a later invention by writers hungry for drama. Leaving the vestibule, you pass beneath a low, pointed arch and enter a grand circular gallery ringed by niches where statues once stood. Mainstream fact, these statues honored emperors, benefactors, and victorious gladiators. Their pedestals would have borne inscriptions extolling their deeds. Now the niches are empty holes, stone eyes staring into the gloom. You pause in the center of the gallery, lantern casting concentric circles of light on the dusty floor. From here, you can almost imagine the riot of color that once filled these halls. Vibrant murals of battle, bronze shields glinting on the walls, and silk banners fluttering from balconies. Quirky tidbit 2. A medieval traveller wrote that he saw vestiges of purple dye on one marble alcove and proclaimed that the emperor's robes were literally woven into the stone. Modern analysis finds pigment traces so faint they might just be candle soot, but scholars still debate which it represents. Your boots scuff lightly against the mosaic fragments underfoot. Small tesserae of white and red marble, once part of a grand floor, crunch beneath your steps. You lean down to pick up a fragment, a tiny square, no larger than a fingernail, but polished smooth by centuries of feet. Holding it up to the lantern, you see faint striations where artisanal chisels cut the stone. You feel a pang of reverence for the anonymous craftsman whose names the annals of history forgot. Joke 3. At least they didn't have to worry about carving their LinkedIn profiles into marble. Continuing, you approach a sloping ramp leading upward toward the seating tiers. As you climb, the distant murmur of modern traffic fades beneath the thick stone, replaced by a hollow reverberation that swallows sound. You pause midway, leaning against the rough stucco wall, and imagine tens of thousands of voices building to a crescendo. Cheers, jeers, and the clatter of wooden shields. Mainstream fact, the Colosseum could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, organized by strict social hierarchy. Those closest to the arena floor were senators and equestrians. The topmost tiers held women and the poor. Historians still argue where exactly the emperor's private box was located, but legend places it near the cardinal points to symbolize divine oversight. Reaching the top of the ramp, you step onto the first row of the cavea. The tiered seating carved directly into the rock. You settle onto a smooth bench, legs dangling over the edge. From here, the arena floor stretches out below, a silent expanse of sand that seems to breathe under moth-wing shadows of the arches above. The view is expansive and strangely comforting, as if the world has shrunk down to this single moment. You lean back, resting your lantern on the bench beside you, and close your eyes for a heartbeat to absorb the silence. Above you, The then empty wooden framework of the velarium, now long gone, once supported a vast canopy that shielded spectators from the sun. You imagine sailors hoisting ropes and splicing lines before dawn, their whispered songs blending with crackling torches. Quirky tidbit 3. Some accounts claim the velarium was so effective that on hot days it could drop the temperature in the arena by up to 10 degrees. Roman air conditioning, you might say. Historians still argue whether its full deployment covered the entire seating area or only shaded the upper tiers, leaving the lower seats to bask in imperial favor. As you sit, you become acutely aware of each breath, the swing of your lantern, and the subtle creak of aged stone beneath you. The Colosseum's past games feel less like distant legend and more like hushed bedtime stories, shared in this vault of memory and stone. You might drift off right here if not for the promise of more secrets beyond the next archway. Gathering your lantern, you rise, pause for a final glance at the empty sand below, then step forward, eager for the next whispered story this ancient amphitheatre has to share. You slip silently through a narrow doorway off the gallery and enter a high-ceilinged chamber where the night watchman holds court, his silhouette flickering like a friendly ghost beneath a lone oil lamp. He's the Colosseum's nocturnal custodian, the only living soul besides you in this labyrinth of stone. Mainstream fact: ancient and modern records both note that imperial guards and hired watchmen were stationed in the amphitheatre after hours to deter looters and protect precious marble from opportunistic thieves. Tonight, he's the lone guardian of centuries. He sits on a battered wooden stool, methodically buffing a polished breastplate with a piece of worn leather. Each stroke releases a soft scratch that punctuates the chamber's hush. You approach, lantern in hand, and he looks up with a grin that creases his weathered cheeks. His tunic bears the faded insignia of the Vigiles, the ancient Roman fire and police brigade, though scholars still argue whether that symbol was original to this post or grafted on during a 19th century restoration. Either way, it lends him an air of authority. You offer a polite nod, and he gestures for you to share the bench beside him. As you settle in, he launches into a litany of superstitions passed down through the ages. "Never whistle in the hypogum," he intones, his voice a low rumble, "or you'll summon restless beasts too eager for a midnight snack." Quirky tidbit: some guides insist a whistling dare once unleashed a rogue macaque from the imperial menagerie, which then scavenged amphora shards for fun. Historians still argue whether that macaque ever existed or was an allegory for imperial negligence. He holds up the breastplate, its bronze surface gleaming in torchlight, and recounts a rumor that Emperor Titus himself handed down this very cuirass to his praetorians after the fire of 80 AD as a reward for saving the amphitheatre's lower galleries. You trace the raised decorations, victorious Nike figures surrounded by oak leaves, and feel the cool metal beneath your fingertips. Joke 1. Apparently, saving ancient stadiums was the original extreme home makeover. The watchman's lantern cup rattles as he shifts, revealing a small pouch of chalk dust at his belt. "Pilgrims used to leave chalk marks on the arches," he whispers, believing it would erase their sins when the sun rose. You imagine a thin line of white scribble stretching around the perimeter, like an ancient, clean slate movement. Quirky tidbit 2. Late medieval pilgrims reportedly chipped bits of the Colosseum walls to bring home as holy relics, tiny fragments said to ward off evil. Historians still argue whether such talismans were genuine or clever forgeries marketed by enterprising monks. You lean closer to peer at the watchman's pouch, noting the tiny chalk bits and a single blue bead, perhaps a protective amulet against the evil eye. He taps the bead thoughtfully. You see this? Found it wedged between stones in the vomitoria, he says, referring to the amphitheatre's exit passages. Locals claim it belonged to a child born during games, blessed by Diana herself. Joke 2. Nothing says divine endorsement like a complimentary stadium berth. The watchman pauses and stares upward, as if listening to some distant murmur. You follow his gaze to a series of iron pegs hammered into the wall, likely anchors for lantern hooks or signage. Ahead, small niches hold ceramic oil lamps, long cold and varnish cracked, their spouts pointing toward the floor as if in unread letters. They say if you light one at midnight, you can glimpse the faces of the condemned, he murmurs, but I've never dared. You feel a prickle of unease, balanced by the watchman's calm presence. Mainstream fact. Scholars agree that the amphitheatre's lighting was originally supplied by oil lamps and torches, not unlike those still scattered around you, though the exact layout is deduced from sparse archaeological evidence. You glance at the lamp beside the watchman, its soot-blackened spout whispering of 1,000 flickering flames. His eyes meet yours, and he grins. Ever wonder why the Colosseum has more than 80 vomitoria entrances? They wanted to empty the crowd in minutes, safety first, even in ancient Rome. Joke 3. Modern stadiums still fail that test. But hey, at least they have nachos. He leans forward and tilts the breastplate so that your lantern light dances across the metal's embossed scenes. Triumphal chariots, gladiators locked in clinch, trumpeters poised to blare. These images were meant to intimidate, he says, but ironically, they also soothed the masses. A spectacle for the eyes, so they'd forget their rents were due. Quirky tidbit 3. Medieval jesters claimed that some gladiator helmets bore hidden compartments for love letters, smuggled during games. Historians still argue whether those compartments were practical or merely fanciful legends. You settle back and listen as the watchman shares his own theory, that the Colosseum wasn't just about blood and thunder, but a nightly meditation on power, unity, and the fragility of life. His voice softens to a conspiratorial whisper. In the quiet of night, this place hums with the memories of every soul who cheered, wept, and hoped for a spark of glory. You nod, feeling a warmth well up in your chest, an odd comfort amidst damp stone. As the watchman finishes his tales, he stands and offers you the breastplate. Try it on, he says. You slip your arm through the leather straps and hoist it over your shoulders. The weight is surprising, heavy enough to ground you in the present, yet balanced, as if designed by someone keenly attuned to human movement. You turn side to side, imagining yourself a guard of old, sentinel of this grand arena. For a moment, the world outside the Colosseum fades entirely. You remove the cuirass and hand it back, savoring the lingering resonance of metal against flesh. The watchman extinguishes his lamp, plunging the chamber into near darkness, save for your lantern. He waves you onward toward a narrow stairwell concealed behind a stack of wooden crates. Follow the steps, he murmurs, and you'll find the scent of ash that marks the warriors' changing rooms. You thank him, lantern raised high, and step past his stool into the waiting stairwell. As you ascend, you can't help but glance back and see the watchman's lantern light glowing faintly behind you, a steadfast guardian in the deep night. You imagine him returning to his polishing and muttering superstitions until dawn. Ahead lies another secret passage, beckoning with untold stories. You take a deep breath, exhale slowly, and push onward, guided by the echoes of bronze and whispered lore as the Colosseum's nocturnal custodian fades into the stone.